So Amanda got this cool looking thing, so I decided to make a video of me being a mushroom head, even though I've never actually even done shrooms. Not yet, anyway. So a few days ago, I did a video called Life Under Anarchy, and obviously it was a flippant thing. I was making fun of the fact that a lot of people seem to assume that in the absence of a parasitical ruling class and bureaucrats and tax collectors and mindless thugs of the state, that everybody would be killing and eating each other and it would be Mad Max and all that. And obviously it wasn't supposed to be like a thorough description of a stateless society. I was just kind of making fun of that silly thing. But of course, so predictably, a number of comments were one version or another of Warlords would take over. That if there's not a ruling class, then it would be chaos and big scary gangs of roving nasty people would take over. I recorded one video. It was a little bit less kind and understanding than I could be, so I decided to record this again. I will try to be a little bit more polite in that video, which you'll never see. So let's be clear on what we're talking about. If you say, well, without government, I'm scared there would be warlords and blah, blah, blah. Now, a lot of people might think that this is a difference in what you think of humanity. Are people mostly good? Are people mostly bad? Blah, blah, blah. It actually has nothing to do with that. I'm sure most of the people saying, warlords will take over, think it's about that, but I'm about to prove, nope, it's not about that at all. It's not about predictive powers. It's about basic logic, regardless of how good or bad humanity is overall and on average and all that fun stuff. Because a lot of people talk as if government is this thing that does something. There's this thing called government, and there's this thing called law that, like, keeps people in line and makes people be civilized and solves disputes and this, that, and the other thing. There is no thing called government. If you doubt it, draw me a picture of government. What does it look like? Well, some people in suits. Okay, the people are there. People are real. And these big grandiose buildings. Yep, buildings are real. And they have these law books with, like, stuff that politicians made up. Yeah, the books are real. They're misperceived, but they're real. And they have lots of enforcers. Yeah, the enforcers are all too real with their machinery of thuggery. But what's this thing called government that you think keeps people in line? Is it something other than the people in the building and the books and all the stuff you can actually see? All the stuff that actually exists in the real world? Well, the thing that makes government government isn't a thing, it's a belief. It is the people, not even the people in power, it is the people imagining authority, imagining the right to rule. Imagining that this group of people called government, lawmakers, legislatures, politicians, it is all the normal people imagining that those people have the right, the moral right to rule. Because government means the exercise of authority over a people or place. And authority means the right to rule, not just the ability. Like if there's a street gang beating people up and stealing their money, or there's a purse snatcher robbing a little old lady, nobody calls them government. Why not? They're controlling other people. And nobody calls it taxing. Oh, I see that purse snatcher imposed a tax on that little old lady. Well, what's the difference? The difference is when government does it, most people perceive that to be something, at least to one degree or another, something legitimate and moral and righteous and acceptable and necessary and good for society. But that's just a belief. That's not a real thing. So in the absence of government, all the nasty people who currently use authoritarian power to abuse and oppress people, they would still exist. I don't mean all those bad people disappear. Erasing government is just erasing a belief in the minds of the population. So those nasty people would still be there. And a lot of people in the comments under my past video said, well, they would still find ways to manipulate and oppress and divide and blah, blah, and do nasty things to us. Okay? I mean, I'm sure they'd want to. But exactly how do you think they would do that? Well, I know. What if those nasty people could convince us that they weren't just abusers and thieves and thugs, but that somehow what they were doing was representing us and it was legitimate and legal and necessary for society? Oh, that's government. That's what they did. The warlords did take over. These are the warlords. And it's really weird to watch people making the argument, if we didn't have this gang of parasitic violent thieves ruling us, well then, we might end up with a gang of violent parasitic thieves ruling us. They're literally condoning warlords, and their excuse for doing so is because if we didn't have that, we'd have warlords. These are the warlords. They're already there. The difference is they've convinced you to think there's something legitimate about it. There's something necessary about it. That's what makes us civilized. And so the drastically ironic end result is that you're here insisting, not as somebody in power, you're one of the livestock like me. You're here insisting that we hang on to warlords, and we all accept the warlords, and we all bow to the warlords, and we all view them as legitimate and righteous. And that's authority, that's government. They have the right to do that. Because if we don't do that, we might end up with warlords. But let's be clear on what the question is. Because like I said, government is just an idea. It's a belief in the minds of the people. And that's easy to demonstrate. I've done it before. For example, I hereby declare that I am your king. Whoever you are, or the whole world, whatever. I am now king of the world because I said I am. Okay, so the question is, am I your king? Pretty sure all of you would say no. Well, yeah, but I said I was. Isn't that what determines it? Am I king if I think I am? No. Am I king if you think I am? Yep. That's how government works. If a bunch of people think that a gang of thugs and thieves have the right to rule and that the dominion and subjugation is legitimate, that is by definition government because of what their victims believe. Just like if everybody completely lost their marbles and really and truly believed that I'm king because I said so, if the whole world believed I was king, I would be king by definition. That's how kings got to be kings. And the excuses have been different. Like, well, bloodline, and my father was king, and God anointed me, or some watery bint lobbed a scimitar at me. One excuse or another. You have to get the people to imagine that to be legitimate, or you're not a king, you're just a thug and a thief. And you might have enough fellow thugs and thieves to, like, rob a few peasants, at least until the advent of firearms. Then it gets really difficult to do it by brute force. But if they don't view you as your king, as their king, you're not anything, you're just a thug. Government is in the eye of the beholder. It's not in the mind of the ruler. Yeah, they spew their BS and we represent you and you vote for us, which means you consent and blah, 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 bunch of bullshit, bunch of bullshit, bunch of bullshit. They're only government if you believe they are. And there have been times in history where you see that all too clearly, where one government is saying, I remember many years ago, it was that, what was the group in Texas, like the Republic of Texas or something, some sort of kind of militia-ish constitutionalist group. I don't even remember many of the details. And they said, well, we did these rituals and now we're the righteous government, state government of Texas. And everyone went, ha, 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 ha. And then the state government of Texas said, ha, 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 isn't that silly? They said that? Yeah, that's so silly. Wait a minute. Why are you the actual government of Texas, only because the people of Texas believed their bullshit and didn't believe the bullshit from this other group claiming the right to rule. It's in the eye of the beholder. If enough people are duped enough to imagine a group of political parasites to have the right to rule them, that's government. That's the only difference. So getting back to the question of what happens if government goes away, what that question really means is, what happens if people stop imagining that a group of sociopaths have the right to rob and dominate the rest of us? And when you recognize that that's what the question actually is, the whole, warlords would take over, becomes just patently, obviously stupid. To think that, you would literally have to think, because this is what it boils down to, you would literally have to think that warlords are a bigger threat to humanity when humanity doesn't recognize warlords as a righteous ruling class. If we just viewed them as thugs and thieves and felt no obligation to obey them and felt justified defending against them and trying to chase them away and shooting at them and their thugs. No. If we didn't recognize those sociopaths as our rightful lords and masters, I can't even say it. It's so ridiculous. That's when they're the real threat, is when we all just see them as thugs. That is what you literally have to argue to claim that we need government to avoid even scarier warlords. Because what you're saying is we need the people to imagine certain warlords to have the right to rob us and boss us around and control every aspect of our lives. Because otherwise, warlords that nobody viewed as legitimate would somehow boss us around and take our money. And if you just try to think that through, what would that even look like? And I wanted to do a video, someday I might get around to it, spelling that out. Okay, right now you have several 100 million people in this country, in the US. You can do your own example on your own human livestock plantation, wherever you happen to live. And about 100,000 IRS employees, last I checked, robbed well over 100 million people. That's pretty impressive. Like, the victims of the robbery outnumber the thieves, even just the paper pushers, way more than 1,000 to 1. Wow, those are some efficient thieves. You think the IRS is that efficient? No, the victims, most of them imagine an obligation to go along with paying our taxes. It's not just, some thugs are robbing us. Because if it was some thugs are robbing us, we'd all look at each other and go, should we maybe shoot some of them or something so they stop robbing us? And they would stop very quickly, because of those 100,000 paper pushers, only a few thousand are actually armed, the CID agents at the IRS. If it was just a gang of thugs and a few thousand people with guns and then a bunch of unarmed, lazy, stupid paper pushers, which is the rest of the IRS, they're telling 100 million people, you have to pay us a huge percentage of what you earn. You think they'd be able to do that? If not for the perception in the minds of the people that this is legitimate and that we have an obligation to pay our fair share of the cost of society, yada, yada, bullshit. The perception of legitimate authority is what makes psychopaths 1 trillion times more of a threat. Because without that, everybody looks at them and goes, okay, psychos, we don't have an obligation to go along with this. And so when people will say, warlords are take over, or the people who say, well, corporations would oppress us if there wasn't government protecting them, or that was an interesting Freudian slip, protecting us from them, which isn't at all what happens. Government protects corporations from us and robs the crap out of us and gives money to them and uses the violence of the state to crush the competition of these huge corporations. And yet some people magically hallucinate that corporations without government would somehow be way worse. Okay, how would Pepsi Cola oppress me in the absence of a ruling class? And most people just go, well, they'd find a way. How? Here's my plot. I'm going to not buy soda from them, then what happens? You see, even those corporations that I'm not a fan of, and they get favors from government and stuff, they don't force me to buy anything from them, unlike government, which threatens me with nasty things if I don't fund all their crap. Well, they would hire an army. The level of economic ignorance in people's minds who actually believe this stuff is just astounding. Okay, there you are. You're now a diabolical villain in charge of Pepsi Cola. Just throwing a random example out there. And all these people out there, some of them aren't buying your soda. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. All right, we're going to get an army to go kick down people's doors if they don't buy your soda. What's the cost and benefit ratio there? How many sodas does somebody have to buy before it justifies hiring a SWAT team of mercenaries to kick down their door to try to make them buy soda? And by the way, after a few of them get shot, which they would, if somebody came to my house with guns trying to make me buy soda, I would shoot them. So would tens of millions of other Americans. How many people you think are going to sign up to be mercenaries for Pepsi Cola to go after people who don't buy sodas? It doesn't stinking work. That's why the evil sociopaths came up with the bullshit mythology of government. That is the thing that enables them to be successful warlords. And it's the only thing now. They used to be able to build up enough wealth and have enough thugs that all the unarmed peasants, they could boss them around and rob them. Now there's this little thing called firearms. Makes it really hard to do it by brute force if your victim base doesn't think you have the right to rule them. But watching all these people think that they'd be a bigger threat if the rabble didn't think they had the right to do that. It's so just bizarre. It makes no sense. And the thing is, it's because most people have never thought of it in those terms. They think of government as some magical thing that comes down from on high. The law and government and our justice system and some vague stuff magically protects us. Okay, well, what does that actually look like? Can you draw a picture of it? You drew a picture and it looks like thugs with guns bossing us around and taking huge amounts of our money. In fact, literally stealing way more than all other thieves combined. Committing way more murder than all other murderers combined. Way more thuggery and terrorism and assault than all the other thugs in the world combined. That's government. And they only get away with it because most people view it as legitimate. It's not murder, it's national security. And it's not extortion, it's paying your fair share. And it's not thugs in the street bossing people around, it's law enforcement. The perception of the victims, imagining this to be at all legitimate, that is the only reason warlords can do it. That's why there is that belief. That's why they made the Prussian indoctrination system. That's why they constantly spew the indoctrination and propaganda everywhere to try to make you think that you have an obligation to bow to those warlords. Because they're not just thugs, they're a representative constitutional republic, and this is the law of the land, and this is our legal system, and it's the greatest in history. We are the freest of bullshit, 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 and bullshit. So that you will believe and feel an obligation to allow yourself to be victimized by warlords. And the idea that you would be more victimized and everybody around you would be more victimized if you stopped imagining that to be legitimate and righteous and moral is bonkers. But that's what you have to argue to say that it would be worse without a government. Because what you're saying is, if we didn't give societal permission for certain warlords to dominate and rob and control us, well, then warlords would get out of control. Yes, it's that bonkers. It's specifically exactly that kind of bonkers. you have an abuser that you think has the right to abuse you, and the idea of maybe let's not have that abuser anymore brings to your mind, because of the indoctrination in the propaganda, but what if some abuser abuses me? Maybe stop giving permission to any abuser to abuse you. Stop giving your permission for any political parasites to rule you and steal your money and control your life and boss you around. And then see what actually happens. Because the idea that it would get worse if people start thinking and acting like free human beings, that the slaves would be better off still believing in masters and slaves, and somehow, oh, it would be so much worse for the slaves if they stopped believing in having masters and slaves. No, it wouldn't be. And guess who wants you to think the ridiculous notion that it would be? That it would be scarier for you if you thought you owned yourself. Who benefits from you believing something that counterproductive, self-destructive, and insane? I'll give you a hint. It's the warlords currently in power.